The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Medical Institute was a sea of crystal, champagne, and velvet. 500 of the city's most influential figures stood in a hush as Alistair Blackwood, the esteemed hospital administrator, stepped onto the stage. He looked every bit the savior, the man who kept the city's heart beating. Next to him stood a single, empty chair, draped in a silk sash. Tonight, Alistair's voice resonated through the speakers, warm and authoritative. We celebrate 10 years of this institute, but more importantly, I celebrate the woman who made it possible. My wife Rosalind, though she is unwell tonight and couldn't join us, her spirit is in every brick of this building. High in the shadows of the technician's booth, I watched him. I wasn't unwell. I was standing 3 feet away from the lever that would dismantle his entire world. I looked down at the anniversary gift I had spent months preparing. Not a watch, not a vacation, but a mirror. I was going to show the world the man behind the mask, and unlike Alistair's surgical precision, my strike would leave a scar that no amount of medicine could heal. 10 years ago, I didn't marry a man. I married a promise. Alistair Blackwood was a force of nature. When we met, I was a young psychologist specializing in trauma, and he was a rising star in medical administration. He didn't just court me, he studied me. He knew my favorite poets, the exact temperature I liked my coffee, and the way my eyes light up when I talk about the healing power of the mind. Rosalind, he told me under a canopy of stars during our honeymoon in Tuscany, you heal the soul, and I'll build the sanctuary where you can do it. Together, we'll be unstoppable. And for 8 years, we were the power couple of the medical world. I was his advisor, his confidant, and his emotional anchor. I helped him navigate the cutthroat politics of hospital boards, using my understanding of human behavior to help him win over donors and settle disputes. I gave up my private practice to help him build the Blackwood Institute, believing that our work was a shared legacy. Our home was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. Every morning, he would leave a handwritten note by my bedside. Every evening, we would share a glass of wine and discuss our day. He made me feel like the most important person in the room, even when the room was filled with billionaires. I was so wrapped in the warmth of his perfection that I didn't notice the coldness creeping into the corners of our lives. I believed in the fairy tale because I had helped write it. The shift was subtle, like the first frost of winter. It began with the late-night emergencies. Alistair, who had always been a master of his schedule, suddenly found himself tethered to the hospital at odd hours. It's the new surgical wing, Rose, he'd say, not quite meeting my eyes as he adjusted his tie. The logistics are a nightmare. You know how these surgeons are. They have egos the size of planets. I'm the only one who can keep the peace. Then came the phone. The man who used to leave his device on the kitchen counter now carried it with him like a vital organ. He began taking calls in the garden, his voice a low murmur that vanished the moment I opened the door. When I asked him about it, he gave me a look of weary disappointment. Rosalind, you're a psychologist. You're overanalyzing, he'd say, with a condescending pat on my cheek. Don't let your work spill into our marriage. I'm just stressed. I need my wife to be my peace, not my interrogator. The most jarring flag was the anniversary itself. Our 10th year. A decade of building a life. I had spent months planning a quiet, intimate weekend at the coastal cottage where he proposed. I had even found a first edition book by his favorite author. On the morning of our anniversary, I woke up early and prepared a special breakfast. I waited for him to wake, for that familiar smile, for the happy anniversary, my love. He walked into the kitchen, checked his watch, and grabbed his briefcase. I have a meeting with the board at 8 a.m., Rose. Don't wait up for dinner. We're hosting a donor gala for a new pediatric fellow, Camilla. She's a genius, and the hospital needs her funding. He didn't even look at the 10-shaped balloons or the gift on the table. Alistair, I said, my voice trembling. Do you know what today is? He stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. It's Tuesday, Rosalind. And it's a very busy one. Let's talk later. He left. The silence he left behind was heavier than any argument we had ever had. I looked at the table, the cold eggs, the unopened gift, and for the first time in 10 years, the psychologist in me stepped back and looked at the patient. My husband wasn't stressed. He was gone. I didn't follow him to a hotel. I didn't hire a private investigator. As a psychologist, I knew that the truth is rarely hidden in dark alleys. It's hidden in plain sight. in the things people say when they think they are safe. The next day, I went to the hospital under the guise of dropping off his dry cleaning. I didn't go to his office. I went to the staff lounge, the place where the real hierarchy of a hospital is whispered over bad coffee. I sat in a corner with a book, blending into the background. And then I heard it. "Did you see Alistair and Dr. Camilla in the oncology lab last night?" one nurse whispered. The lights were off, but the chemistry was definitely on. "He's obsessed with her," another replied. "He's been redirecting the research grants just to keep her on staff. Poor Rosalind. She's always at those charity events smiling, having no idea she's been replaced by a younger model." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I kept my eyes on my book. I waited until Alistair left for lunch, and then I went to his office. I didn't need to hack his computer. I knew his password. It was the date of our first date. He hadn't bothered to change it. I opened his private emails. I didn't find just a fling. I found a strategy. There were emails to a divorce attorney dating back 6 months. He was systematically moving our shared assets into the Institute's development fund, a fund that he controlled solely. He was planning to divorce me after the 10-year gala, using the 10 years of service clause to minimize my settlement. But the most devastating part was a recording of a meeting with Camilla. "Rosalind is a relic, Camilla," Alistair's voice said through the speakers. "She's boring. She's obsessed with the past, and she's become an emotional anchor that's dragging me down. I've spent 10 years taking care of her fragile mind. Now it's time for me to have someone with fire. Once the gala is over and the funding is secured, she'll be out of the house and out of my life. I'll make sure she's categorized as mentally unstable during the proceedings. Who's going to believe a psychologist who couldn't even see her own husband's affair?" Camilla's laugh was light, sharp, and mocking. "You're cruel, Alistair." "I love it." I sat in his expensive leather chair, the air in the room suddenly feeling like ice. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to destroy my professional reputation, the one thing I had worked my entire life to build. He wanted to use my own profession against me, to pathologize my grief so he could walk away with the money and the girl. The pain was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest. But as I stared at the screen, something shifted. The peaceful wife he wanted was dead. The relic he mocked was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the human mind better than he ever would. He thought I was fragile. I was going to show him that a psychologist doesn't just heal minds. She can also dismantle them. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him that night when he came home late, smelling of Camilla's perfume. I didn't scream when he kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. I played the part. I became the boring, fragile wife he expected. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the gala. I didn't look at divorce lawyers. I looked at the Institute's bylaws. I looked at the ethical codes of the medical board. And I looked at Alistair's most precious asset, his public image as a moral leader. I began cleaning the house. I found the notes, the receipts, and the documents he thought were hidden. I didn't burn them. I archived them. The night of the gala arrived. I told Alistair I was feeling a bit of a migraine and might be late. He was relieved. It gave him more time to be seen with Camilla. "Take your time, darling," he said with that practiced hollow smile. "I'll explain your absence to the board. Just rest your poor head." I watched him leave, looking magnificent in his tuxedo. Then I changed into a simple, elegant black dress. Not a bridal white, but a morning black for the woman I used to be. I didn't go to the ballroom floor. I went to the AV room. The technicians knew me. I had helped their families, coached their children, and listened to their problems for years. To them, I wasn't the administrator's wife. I was the woman who cared. "I have a special tribute for Alistair," I told the head technician with a gentle smile. "A surprise for the 10th anniversary. Can you swap the history of the Institute reel for this one when I give the signal?" He smiled back, unsuspecting. "Anything for you, Mrs. Blackwood." I stood in the darkness, looking down at the ballroom. I saw Alistair standing on the stage, the empty chair beside him a symbol of his long-suffering devotion to his sick wife. I saw Camilla in the front row, glowing with the anticipation of her new life. Alistair began his speech. He talked about honor. He talked about legacy. He talked about the future of medicine. "And now," Alistair said, his voice dripping with false emotion, "let us look back at the 10 years that brought us here." The lights dimmed. The giant screen behind him flickered to life. It wasn't a history of the building. It was a history of a narcissist. The first slide wasn't a picture of the hospital. It was a high-resolution photo of the pediatric fund ledger, showing the millions redirected into an offshore account. The second was a transcript of his email to the divorce lawyer, detailing his plan to frame me as mentally unstable. The crowd gasped. The sound was like a physical blow. Alistair froze, his shadow cast large and distorted against the evidence of his own corruption. I stepped out of the booth and onto the small balcony overlooking the stage. I didn't need a microphone. The silence in the room was so deep that every word I spoke carried to the back of the hall. "You're right, Alistair," I said, my voice calm, clinical, and terrifyingly clear. A decade is a long time. Long enough to build a sanctuary, and long enough to realize that the person running it is the most dangerous patient in the building. Alistair turned, his face a mask of horror. He looked at me, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't see his peace. He saw his judge. "This isn't a gala, Alistair," I continued. "This is an intervention, and unfortunately for you, there is no cure for what you are." The silence in the Blackwood Institute's grand ballroom wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, like the air before a devastating storm. Alistair stood on the stage, the blue light from the massive screen reflecting off his pale, sweating forehead. Behind him, the emails to his divorce attorney, the ones where he called me unstable and a relic, were frozen for 500 pairs of eyes to read. I stepped down from the balcony, walking slowly toward the stage. My black dress trailed behind me like a shadow. Every step I took was a heartbeat in the silence of the room. Alistair tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Rosalind, this is a technical glitch," he finally stammered, his voice cracking over the microphone. "Someone has compromised the system. Security! Shut it down! Security isn't coming, Alistair," I said, my voice calm and projecting through the room without a microphone. "Because the men at the doors aren't your staff tonight. They are the independent auditors from the medical board, and they've been reviewing your offshore transfers for the last 3 hours." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. These were the elite of the city, people who valued reputation above all else. To them, an affair was a scandal, but financial fraud and professional sabotage were a death sentence. I reached the edge of the stage and looked up at him. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of shared meals and whispered secrets, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. A man who had practiced his perfection so long, he actually believed his own lies. "You told Camilla that I was an emotional anchor," I said, my voice echoing. "You told her that you were taking care of my fragile mind. But the truth, Alistair, is that you weren't protecting me. You were hiding behind me. You used my reputation as a psychologist to validate your stability, while you were hollow on the inside." I turned toward the front row, where Camilla sat. She was no longer glowing. She was clutching her designer purse, her eyes darting toward the exit. She was a predator, and she could smell the blood in the water. She knew that being associated with Alistair now didn't mean a bright future. It meant a career-ending investigation. "And you, Dr. Camilla," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You thought you were the younger model, stepping into a life of luxury, but you should have checked the balance sheets. Alistair didn't choose you for your fire. He chose you because he needed a co-conspirator to help him justify the redirection of the pediatric research grants. You aren't his new love. You're his last desperate gamble." Camilla stood up, her face flushed with shame. "I had nothing to do with his finances," she hissed, her voice trembling. "The emails say otherwise," I replied simply. "And the Board of Ethics will likely agree." Alistair finally snapped. He lunged toward the AV controls on the podium, trying to rip the cables out. But I didn't flinch. I watched him with the clinical detachment of a doctor observing a patient in a psychotic break. He was no longer the hospital administrator. He was a man losing his grip on the only thing he ever loved, his power. "You think you've won?" he screamed, pointing at me. "I built this. This institute bears my name. You're just a therapist who talks to people about their feelings. You have no standing here. I'll have you committed for this. I'll prove you're delusional." "Alistair," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried further than his screams. "Look at the screen. The image changed. It wasn't an email anymore. It was a scanned copy of the original charter for the Blackwood Medical Institute. 10 years ago, when we founded this place, You insisted on using my family's land and my inheritance to secure the initial loan, I reminded him. And because you wanted to prove your devotion to me, you signed a clause in the bylaws. Do you remember Article 4, Section 9? Alistair froze. His hand stayed suspended over the podium. The moral turpitude clause, I said. It states that if any member of the board, including the administrator, is found to be engaging in criminal fraud or professional sabotage against a founding partner, their shares are immediately forfeited to the victim. You didn't just expose yourself tonight, Alistair. You signed your resignation. The chairman of the board, an elderly man named Dr. Sterling, who had been a mentor to us both, stood up from his seat. He looked at Alistair with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Alistair, Dr. Sterling said, his voice heavy with authority. The police are in the lobby. We've seen enough. Rosalind has provided the board with the original ledgers you thought were shredded. Your medical license is being suspended pending a full criminal inquiry into the pediatric funds. Alistair slumped. The bravado, the suit, the polished smile, it all dissolved. He looked small. He looked like the coward he had always been beneath the white coat. He reached out for the empty chair next to him, the chair he had draped in silk to mock my illness, and he fell into it. He was finally sitting in the seat he had prepared for me. I didn't stay to watch them lead him away. I didn't need to see the handcuffs or the flashing lights of the patrol cars. As a psychologist, I knew that the greatest punishment for a narcissist isn't a prison cell. It's the loss of their audience. Alistair Blackwood was now a man without a mirror. No one was left to tell him he was a genius. No one was left to tell him he was a savior. He was finally alone with the one person he hated most, himself. I walked out of the ballroom, through the glass doors, and into the cool night air. The city lights stretched out before me, bright and indifferent. I went to my car, but I didn't drive to our house. The house that was filled with his handwritten lies and his hidden cameras. I drove to my old office, the small, modest space I had kept even after he asked me to close it. I unlocked the door, turned on the lamp, and sat in my chair. I picked up the first edition book I had bought for our anniversary. I opened it to the first page. I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't even feel like a survivor. I felt like a woman who had finally cleared the clutter from her mind. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was no longer a weight. It was just a memory. I realized that Alistair hadn't taken 10 years from me. He had given me a 10-year lesson in the resilience of my own spirit. He had tried to use my profession to destroy me, but in doing so, he had forced me to become my own best patient. I had diagnosed the rot in my life, and I had performed the surgery myself. To every woman watching this, there is a specific kind of cruelty in being told that your mind is the problem when your heart is being broken. There are men who will try to make you feel crazy or unstable simply because you are starting to see the truth of who they are. They will try to pathologize your valid emotions so they don't have to take responsibility for their own actions. But remember this, your intuition is not a symptom of an illness. It is your greatest strength. If someone tells you that you are overanalyzing, it's often because they are afraid of what you'll find if you look too closely. Alistair Blackwood thought he was the master of psychology because he knew how to manipulate people's perceptions. But he forgot that a psychologist's true job isn't to control the narrative, it's to find the truth. I lost a husband, a house, and a dream. But I gained something much more valuable. I gained my voice. I proved that you can't build a monument to healing on a foundation of lies. And I proved that the fragile wife is often the strongest architect in the room. My name is Rosalind Burke. I am a psychologist. I am a founder. And I am finally, for the first time in a decade, completely and beautifully whole. If you realized your partner was secretly planning to destroy your reputation while pretending to love you, would you have the patience to stay silent and gather evidence? Or would you confront them immediately? Is justice worth the wait? Or is walking away the only way to truly win? Let me know in the comments.